Japanese one. Also, before I get started, I was curious if you guys would be interested in like a story time type video. I have the story of a little motorcycle accident that I got into. It was a while ago, and obviously I'm fine, but I was just curious if you'd be interested in that kind of thing, because it's kind of a funny story, honestly. It's sort of anything that could go wrong did go wrong kind of a story. But yeah, also, if you're new to my channel, or if you've been watching my videos but haven't yet, I'd really appreciate it if you subscribe to my channel, and if you left me a like or a comment on this video. If you have any kind of true crime case suggestions that you want to hear, I'd definitely be interested in if you left me like a suggestion in the comments as well. I have a lot of Japanese true crime cases that I'm interested in covering, but recommendations are always appreciated as well. Alright, so this video is the case of Carrie Ann Jopek, a 13-year-old girl who went missing after a party and wasn't found for about 17 months, and when she was found, it was buried in the backyard at her best friend's house. This is a cold case that went about 30 years before being solved, and it was only solved because the killer confessed, because he couldn't handle being haunted by Carrie's ghost anymore. So, Carrie Ann Jopek was born on August 17th, 1968, in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, to Carolyn Tosinan. I don't know if that's how you pronounce it, but that's how I'm going to pronounce it. And the late Robert C. Beezer Jopek Jr. After her parents split up, her mom remarried to Fred Tosinan. And Carrie and her little sister Maggie lived together with him and their mother at 1929 South 10th Street in Milwaukee, which is described as being a friendly and family-oriented neighborhood, the kind where kids played outside until the streetlights came on at night, back in the good old days. Carrie's mom said that Carrie was beautiful, artistic, and a great student in school, though she had a rebellious streak and wasn't afraid to ignore rules to get what she wanted. I don't know why my voice keeps cracking, I'm sorry. Quote, she was basically a good girl, but if you told her to do something, she would usually do the opposite. She was a bit of a rebel who didn't like being told what to do, but she was a good girl at heart, which is what really matters. Despite her stubbornness, Carrie was said to be really close with her mom, but she sometimes had issues with her stepfather, who was the disciplinarian of the family. When she was 13 years old and a 7th grader at, I meant to look up how to say this name, Kosciuszko Middle School, she got suspended from school for walking around the halls without a hall pass, which is kind of a stupid reason to suspend someone from school for the day, honestly, in my opinion, but whatever. The school called Carolyn and said she could pick Carrie up from the school office, but Carolyn decided not to, since their house was only a block away from the school. Carolyn knew that Carrie wanted to go to a party at her friend's house and thought that that was the reason she'd been walking around without a hall pass, that she had wanted to get herself suspended so she could go to the party. But as far as that party goes, some of the articles that I read said that no one knew about it until, like, way later, so I'm not sure, honestly. But it's definitely true that Carolyn thought Carrie got suspended on purpose so that she could go to the party. I read that in a bunch of places, so whether she decided that later on or knew that day, I'm not sure, but anyway. So that day, March 16th, 1982, Carrie left the school at around 1:30 p.m. and went to the party that her best friend Robin Mant was having at her house, which was across the street from Carrie's. Crunchy. Carolyn started to get worried when it got dark and Carrie hadn't come home, so she went across the street to Robin's house to look for Carrie. There were a few other kids still there as well, but they all said that they hadn't seen Carrie, and when Carolyn called Carrie's other friends, none of them knew anything about where she was either. At 11 p.m. that night, a bunch of people from the neighborhood walked the streets to look for Carrie, but they Since Milwaukee was considered to be a very safe place at the time, though, the police didn't immediately think that she might have been kidnapped or killed, but rather saying she might have just run away or been staying at a friend's house, since Carolyn told them that she had gotten suspended from school, and the police decided that, maybe she just was afraid to come home because of what her parents might think. Carolyn insisted that Carrie wouldn't have been gone for such a long time without telling her, though, and the police did end up, going and looking for her. First, they went to her biological father, who kept in close contact with Carrie despite obviously not being with her mom anymore. But he had been at work all day that day and said he hadn't seen or heard from Carrie at all. The police interviewed her friends, other family members, and neighbors, and no one had any information to offer them either. The media picked up the story, and Carrie's picture was put on the front pages of the local newspapers, along with hundreds of missing person posters put up all around the city. The police ended up getting a lot of tips from various different people claiming to have spotted Carrie at different times in different locations, but the police didn't end up being able to verify any of those sightings. So they decided to look into Carrie's stepdad, Fred, since the two of them fought a lot because of Carrie's rebelliousness. Fred had only become her stepdad about 4 years prior to this, and Carrie didn't respect him or his authority because she didn't see him as a father figure. And Fred was frustrated that Carrie didn't listen to his rules or, show him any respect. Of course, he denied to the police that he would ever do anything to hurt Carrie, but the police were extra suspicious of him when they found out that he had just put down a fresh concrete patio in their backyard, thinking the obvious that he had used that to hide her body, and so they brought in ground-penetrating radar to see if they could find anything under there, but they didn't, and so that was pretty much the end of the line for him as a suspect. They didn't have any other reason to be suspicious of him, so the next person they looked at was Johnny Mant, Robin's older brother. Since Carrie and Robin were best friends and lived right across the street from each other, Carrie spent a lot of time at their house, and Johnny, who was 17, still lived at home. Carrie had recently mentioned to her mom that Johnny was starting to show an interest in her, and maybe was even trying to get with her, despite her being 13. And he was known as a troublemaker with a bit of a record for petty crime. He was apparently also known to be someone that the younger girls could go to for drugs or alcohol if they wanted it. When the police talked to him, he told them that he hadn't seen Carrie at all, and that on the day she disappeared, he was home all day by himself. Since the police didn't have anything to connect him to her disappearance, they left it at that with him pretty much too. For the next year and a half, no progress was made on the case until the Mant family decided to do some renovations on their house. A contractor was called in to work on the deck in their backyard, and while he was tearing down the existing deck to the ground level so that he could rebuild it, he smelled something very bad, and that would turn out to be a badly decomposed body curled up in the fetal position and buried in a shallow grave. Apparently Johnny was there as the body was being dug up, and he was visibly shaken, crying and even throwing up at one point. So that made a lot of people become suspicious of him again, because they thought that that was a sign of him, feeling guilty for what he'd done. The news spread fast, and neighbors ran across the street to the yard to see the remains, including Carolyn. The police got there quickly and roped off the scene to dig up the body and preserve any evidence, though. Carolyn knew right away, instinctively, that the body was that of her daughter, which was confirmed by the clothes she was wearing and also by dental records. The clothes the body had on were the ones Carrie was last seen in, and Carolyn identified the jacket the body had on, saying, quote, "I verified her clothing, her torn jacket on the side which I sewed." The autopsy showed that Carrie had died from a fractured skull, broken neck, and hemorrhaging in her head. Since the body was found under the man's porch, Johnny became the prime suspect again, and the police brought him in for questioning again, but they still didn't have any real evidence to connect him to the murder, so they ended up having to let him go again. Neighbors started to whisper and speculate amongst themselves, as neighbors do, and many of them wondered how it was possible that Carrie's body had been buried that Johnny had killed Carrie then. This was apparently the first time the police had heard about that party, and that gave them new suspects to track down and question. Johnny was adamant that there hadn't been a party, though, and no one was speaking up to confirm that there had been a party or that they were there, so the cops hit a dead end pretty quickly with that. Then a neighbor reported to the police that they'd seen a young man in the man's backyard a few days after Carrie's body had been discovered, standing by the hole in the ground while crying and raising his hands up, which obviously seemed suspicious. He was identified as Jose Ferreira. I hope I'm saying that right. Ferreira. A 17-year-old who lived a few houses down from the manse. When the police brought him in, he said he knew Carrie, but that he was just in the backyard because he'd been paying his respects, and he didn't know anything about a party or about how Carrie had died at all. There wasn't anything that tied him to the murder, so the police let him go, and they were back to having no suspects or leads again. As time went by, the case became cold. Carolyn stayed in their house where Carrie had grown up, and Carrie's friends would come by to visit every once in a while, but they all eventually grew up and moved away and got on with their lives. The only one who didn't was Jose Ferreira, but who visited Carrie's family pretty often, coming to chat in their kitchen and comfort them. He ended up getting pretty close with them, and he'd come to family events and parties over the years. Carolyn thought that it was nice to have a connection with someone who'd known Carrie as well and who'd cared about her. When the two of them would talk about Carrie, Jose would tell Carolyn that Carrie was haunting him. And that's how it was for 33 years, until early in the morning on Sunday, October 11th, 2015, the Milwaukee News Channel, WISN 12, got a call from a man saying he wanted to confess to killing Carrie Ann Jopek and how it had happened. Some of the articles that I read said that he only said that he killed a girl and didn't actually specifically mention Carrie, but without even saying her name, the details that he gave made it pretty obvious that he killed a girl at a party and buried her body under a porch in the backyard. So either way, the reporter who had picked up the phone listened to the man confess, and that man didn't give his name. The reporter wrote down all the details that were mentioned, and then when the man hung up, the reporter went straight to the police, as he should. A counselor for a crisis hotline got the same phone call that day too. The man said he'd killed Carrie or a girl at a party and buried her under the porch of the man's house, saying that he wasn't sure if he wanted to, quote, go out in a blaze of glory or in silence, but he did want it to be on the news, which is why he had called them. I'm not sure, the order that he made these calls in. I think some articles said that he called the counseling hotline first and then called the news. This man, but yeah. At the same time as those calls were happening, a woman walked into the West Milwaukee police station and told officers that her soon-to-be ex-husband had told her he met a girl at a party and had killed her. She said that he had told her he hit her, which made her fall down a flight of stairs and break her neck. He followed her down and, quote, had his way with her as she lay on the floor at the bottom of the stairs. 2 days later, on October 13th, Jose Ferreira, now 50 years old, turned himself into the police and confessed to exactly what had happened. When Carolyn found out it was Jose the police had arrested, she said Jose had once told her he and some friends were with Carrie when she hit her head and had died, but he wouldn't tell the police that. Quote, they were all drinking Yukon Jack and smoking weed, Carolyn said. They got scared, so they grabbed a dry cleaning bag, wrapped her up in that, and dug a hole under the porch and buried her. An investigator who Carolyn kept in contact with gave her a note Jose had written detailing what had happened, which said, quote, they were drinking. Her and him went down the basement stairs and she tripped and snapped her neck. He said that he had sexual intercourse with her. He thought she was unconscious but realized she was dead, and the next day he buried her. Quote, the year that she was missing, he told me she was haunting him, Carolyn told a reporter say to him was, "Face the music for what he did to her. I would like him in jail for it." Even though she was relieved that someone was finally in custody for what had happened to Carrie, she wasn't sure if he was really telling the truth about her death having been an accident. In his full confession, Jose said that he met Carrie for the first time at the party at the man's house, and both of the man's parents were at work, so there were no adults present. I don't know where Johnny was, though. Jose had been drinking and smoking weed, and he saw Carrie and liked her. So they started talking, and he offered her a joint, which she took a puff from. Then he asked Carrie if she wanted to go down to the basement with him, which was apparently designated as the makeout area. She initially said yes, but as they went to the stairs, Carrie had second thoughts, saying, quote, "I don't know if this is a good idea." Jose said he gave Carrie a stern look and told her, "You are going downstairs." He admitted to the police that he then shoved Carrie down the stairs, and he saw her hit the railing, then the wall, and finally fall all the way down, landing on her back on the floor, with her legs and feet on the last two stairs at the very bottom. He followed her down and realized that she was unconscious, which he saw as, quote, "an opportunity." So he pulled her down flat on the floor and stood over her, saying, quote, "You're such a beautiful girl." The articles that I read said various things about what he did to her after that. A few said that he touched her chest through her shirt. Some said that he full-on had sex with her body, like I said earlier. And others said that he sexually abused her. So it's hard to say exactly what happened. But he realized while he was doing that she had a broken neck and wasn't just unconscious but dead. And apparently at first he panicked. His first thought was that he should just run and act like nothing had happened, but then he realized that other people at the party had seen him with Carrie. So he dragged her body through the basement to a door that led outside, grabbed a shovel, and buried her in a shallow grave under the porch. Since Carrie had long hair, he realized after he buried her that some of it was sticking out of the ground. So he went back later to cover it with more dirt. He told the police that he did all of that by himself without any help from anyone else. In the wake of Jose's sudden confession, people wondered why it took him so long to come forward, and he told the police that Carrie's ghost had been haunting him. Despite talking about ghosts so much, he was found competent to stand trial, and he was charged with second-degree murder, despite having confessed to the crime himself. When he went to trial early in 2016, he changed his plea to not guilty. To keep him out of jail despite his confession, Jose's lawyers tried to argue that it had actually been Johnny Mant that killed Carrie, since neither him nor Robin ever mentioned a party, even though it had happened at their house. The lawyers said that a boy Robin was dating at the time came forward and claimed that Robin had told him her brother Johnny was responsible for the murder, but Robin herself denied ever having said that. She suggested that the boy made the story up to try and get less time for an unrelated crime that he'd committed, and that theory wasn't pursued by the police any further after that. Since so much time had gone by since Carrie's death, police were worried they wouldn't be able to get a murder conviction, so they offered Jose a plea bargain. He agreed and pled guilty, not to second-degree murder, but to attempted second-degree sexual assault / use of force as party to a crime and false imprisonment as party to a crime. In court he said, quote, "I just want this to be over with. To be over and done with, rather." Assistant District Attorney Carl Hayes agreed that the case would have been difficult to prosecute, calling Jose a pathetic individual who didn't pose a threat to the public anymore. Both he and Jose's defense lawyer painted a picture of a man who'd been plagued by a tortured life, having had brush-ins with the law enforcement throughout the years and suffering from mental illness, and on top of that having become an alcoholic, drinking heavily in the time before his confession. District Attorney Carl Hayes said, quote, "Mr. Ferrier had hit a wall, sort of a rock bottom. My foot's numb. My leg is asleep. I'm holding it up above the floor because I can't Carolyn was also allowed to provide a statement, and she told the court, quote, "He's still alive. Carrie's gone. The only time I'll see her again is in heaven." Quote, "It's been 33 years since she's been gone. I've been praying for this day. At least now he's going to be sentenced. At least she has some closure, and we have some closure." Caroline also said that she didn't believe that Jose was truly sorry, but that it was her daughter who had been haunting him, saying, quote, "That girl was very persistent." Lots of people were outraged that after all that, Jose only got 7 years, but Carrie's family was satisfied with the sentence, happy that the killer had finally been identified and was receiving some sort of punishment for it, which to them, like I said before, meant closure. Ugh. Ow, my leg. We're doing it like this now. Where did I leave off? Okay. They also knew there was a risk of him walking free after all that time. So, at least with the plea bargain, they knew he would have to serve those 7 years. So he'd be getting some kind of punishment at least. Quote, "It's better than taking a gamble and suffering a complete loss," Fred Tosinan, Carrie's stepdad, said. "I would like for him to be able to sit all the time she had to sit up on that porch alone. He got to be married, he got to have a family, and she got nothing." Tammy Zinglier-Schmidt, Carrie Ann Jopek's cousin, said. There's a documentary about this case, or it's really an episode on a show, a true crime show, called Buried in the Backyard. I think it's season 2, episode 5, called Guilt or Innocence, Fatal Fall, Remembering Carrie Ann Jopek. So yeah, that's the case. To be honest, this kind of reminds me of the movie, what is it called, The Lovely Bones or something like that. I've never actually seen that movie, but I know the premise. It's like a little girl who got murdered and her ghost does some stuff. I don't know if she haunts the killer or what, but yeah, it kind of reminds me of that. But yeah, let me know what you thought about this case down in the comments. And like I said, please don't forget to like, subscribe to my channel, and leave me a comment. Thank you for watching, and I hope you found this case to be relaxing. Have a good night. Bye.